My name is Dara Mitchell. I'm 29, and tonight, after 5 long years, I'm stepping back into a world I left behind my family. They're gathering at Mason, one of the city's most exclusive dining spots, to celebrate my sister Heather's engagement. What they don't realize is that everything about me has changed since the last time we spoke. For them, I'm still the black sheep, the one who turned her back on tradition. They don't know what I've built as I smooth the fabric of my black dress. My stomach turns. Tonight isn't just a dinner, it's a reckoning. And sometimes, the most difficult tables to book are the ones that force you to sit with your past. If you've ever had to fight for respect from the people who were supposed to believe in you, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And hit like and subscribe this once for every person who ever had to carve their own path. In my family, being a Mitchell of Greenwich, Connecticut came with expectations. We weren't simply affluent, we were legacy. My parents, Richard and Margaret Mitchell, built their lives around appearances, prestigious addresses, Ivy League diplomas, and high-status careers. Our grand colonial home served more as a stage than a sanctuary. My mother would host extravagant fundraisers and dress us up like curated accessories, parading her children as proof of her social dominance. The Mitchell children are destined for greatness, she declared at garden parties, her manicured hand resting proudly as champagne flute. Heather's heading to Yale Law. Ethan is a mathematical prodigy. He'll be a financier, of course, and when the spotlight turned to me, her smile thinned. Dara has a creative spirit. She'll find her way. Translation, I was the outlier, the artistic one, the child who never quite fit into the Mitchell mold. While my siblings collected accolades and acceptance, I found solace in the hum of our family kitchen. Elena, our Greek housekeeper, saw what my parents didn't to spark. She taught me the language of food long before I knew how to translate it into a dream. You have the hands, she'd say as we worked side by side, and the soul, you feel flavor. By my early teens, I was experimenting with my own recipes. By 16, I hosted secret dinners for friends whenever my parents were away. That kitchen became my haven. It was where I came alive. But to my father, cooking was beneath our name. Mitchell's hire chefs. They don't become them. He said when I first mentioned culinary school, to appease him, I applied to business programs. I ended up at Dartmouth, his alma mater, where I balanced spreadsheets by day and cooked for underground supper clubs by night. I snuck in food science electives under the guise of business-related coursework and saved every cent from catering gigs to pay for weekend workshops with local chefs. I lived a double life until grad school, when everything shifted. It was during an MBA program I loathed that Chef Lauren Bissett, a culinary icon with 3 Michelin stars, visited our campus for a lecture. I volunteered to help cater a university reception and served a sauce reduction he couldn't ignore. Who taught you this? He asked, his accent thick and curious. Books, practice, trial and error. I said. He slipped me a card. You don't belong in classrooms. Come to New York. Let me teach you. That night, everything changed. 2 weeks later, I stood in my parents' immaculate living room and dropped the bomb. I was leaving grad school to pursue culinary training. Silence. Thick, ice cold, unacceptable. My father said finally, each syllable sharp. You invested in a path I never chose. I replied. My mother stiffened. If you go down this road, you go without our support. Heather. Back from her first year at Yale Law. I nodded, charmed. Ethan's smile was the first genuine one of the evening. Allison's, however, was tight-lipped and tense. I'd later learned she'd been the one tasked with choosing the venue and had spent days worried it wouldn't live up to the Mitchell standard. We already ordered champagne, my mother announced as I took my seat. I hope that's suitable. I noted the bottle. Premium, vintage, but not extravagant, flashy enough to impress, restrained enough to avoid scandal. Classic Mitchell optics. On us. The restaurant glowed. Warm amber light spilled over every polished surface. highlighting the brushed brass fixtures and soft velvet seating. The buzz of hushed conversations and polished silverware filled the space with an energy I curated meticulously over years. Everything from the acoustics to the floral arrangements had been selected by me, but tonight, I was here anonymously, watching my family marvel at a place they had no idea I had built. As the champagne arrived, I caught Jose's eye from across the room. He paused. Reading the situation instantly, I gave the slightest shake of my head no recognition. He pivoted effortlessly into performance mode. Excellent selection, he told my father, uncorking with practiced finesse. We're here to celebrate an engagement, my father said with unnecessary volume, angling for acknowledgement. A wonderful occasion, Jose replied smoothly, filling each glass with elegance. I'm shocked you were able to get a table here, I said, voice light but laced with irony. I hear the waitlist is brutal. Bradley leaned in, smug. I know a guy, he said, as if that explained everything. A client connected with management owed me a favor. I bit my tongue. He was clearly referring to Craig Winters, one of our key investors. I'd be having a word with Craig soon. Well, that's clever of you, I murmured, raising my flute. To the future Mr. and Mrs. Whitaker, my father toasted, lifting his glass high. Success, wealth, and all things legacy. We clinked glasses. I took a sip. The temperature, effervescence, and pour were flawless, exactly as I had trained my staff to deliver. So, my mother said, placing her glass down with precision, tell us, what have you been up to all these years? You've been very elusive. Eyes turned. I could feel the weight of each gaze pressing in, waiting for me to falter. I've been in food, I answered calmly, developing my skills, growing professionally. Heather rolled her eyes. Still cooking. I thought you'd have outgrown that little phase by now, Ethan chuckled dryly. Not everyone is built for finance. Bradley tilted his head, genuinely perplexed. So, you work in kitchens? I've held a variety of roles, I said, keeping it vague. Catering, culinary development, operations. My mother's smile tightened. Well, it's good to hear you're getting by. Of course, should you ever need support, you know where we are. Just then, Jessica approached with the amuse-bouche compressed watermelon spheres topped with fermented black garlic and micro cilantro, each one plated with tweezers, a detail I'd insisted on for visual precision. Compliments of the chef, she announced with grace, placing them before each diner. Heather squinted at hers. This is it. I'm starving. It's a palate teaser, I explained. The meal hasn't begun yet. I'm aware, she snapped. I did choose law school, not culinary camp. They began tasting. My mother nibbled delicately, calculating calories. My father chewed without registering a single flavor. Ethan and Allison appeared pleasantly surprised. Bradley overanalyzed the bite with phrases that made zero culinary sense. Only Heather pushed hers aside and touched. I don't do raw garlic, she sniffed. It's fermented, I murmured, though I knew it wouldn't matter. Jessica's eyes flicked toward me, disappointment barely concealed. I felt a pang, not for myself, but for her and the rest of my staff. They poured everything into this place. Already, I could feel the familiar roles re-establishing. I was still the anomaly, still the one who'd chosen a path they neither valued nor respected. But 5 years had taught me something they'd never understand. I no longer needed their validation. I had created something lasting, something brilliant, and nothing they said could tarnish that. So, I said, as our first course arrived, an artful presentation of heirloom tomatoes, whipped ricotta, and basil oil on porcelain that cost more than Bradley's tight lip. Tell me all about the wedding, Heather beamed. St. Thomas for the vows. Naturally, reception at the plaza for 100 guests, maybe 350. If Mother has her way, the Bennetts and the Astors can't be seated together, my mother said. Not after the yacht incident, I suppressed a laugh. Only in this family could a luxury boating mishap turn into a social minefield. For hundreds, quite intimate, I noted. Bradley leaned forward again, clearly ready to take center stage. It's not just a party, Bradley said, swirling his wine with deliberate flair. It's strategic. Half the invitations are for future leverage. Exactly. My father chimed in. Bradley grasps the importance of cultivating influence. An event like this builds connections. Heather tilted her head toward me. And you, dear, any developments in your love life? Or is your culinary journey still taking up all your time? She hadn't touched her food, just rearranged the tomatoes like puzzle pieces she refused to solve. My focus is on work right now, I replied evenly. Work? Ethan echoed with a chuckle. That's generous. Mother jumped in before I could react. Darling, you're nearly 30. Surely you're considering settling down. Margaret Whitley's son, he's in hospital admin, I believe. Very dependable. I'm not seeking introductions, Mom. Well, you may not have the same selection available forever, she persisted. Especially her expression soured. Currently between roles, I've taken some time off to plan the wedding. She was working too hard. Bradley cut in. I told her she didn't need to grind at some firm when she could focus on charity like my mother. Does. A flicker of annoyance broke through Heather's expression before she quickly masked it with a smile. The third course arrived handmade tagliatelle with pancetta, sweet peas, and fresh mint. A menu favorite, celebrated in multiple publications. My mother picked up her fork with visible skepticism. Tiny portions, she remarked. Back in my day, you paid for a full meal. It's a tasting menu, I replied. Designed to highlight varied textures and layers. It's a clever way to charge more for less, my father grumbled. I watched Bradley butcher the noodles, cutting instead of twirling, ruining the delicate balance I'd handcrafted that morning. So how do you afford a place like this? Heather asked, voice sharp. This restaurant's on every luxury list in the city. I budget carefully, I said, resisting the urge to explain more. Come on, she scoffed. Dinner here is probably more than you earn in a week. Who's footing the bill? A boyfriend? I'm single. I said, then how? Credit? Cards? Loans? Or are you trying to keep up appearances? Heather, Ethan warned. No, really, she invites us here and expects us to believe she's doing fine. It's not adding up. The fourth dish landed. Duck breast with cherry gastrique and farro. Chef Miranda had executed it flawlessly in my absence. The meat blushed with a perfect medium rare. Hugh, undercooked, Bradley announced, pushing the duck with his fork. That's the correct temperature, I explained. Duck should be served medium rare. I like mine well done, he snapped. Waving for Jessica, this is raw. Have it redone. I caught the flicker of irritation in Jessica's eyes. Of course, sir, she said coolly. I gave her a slight nod. She'd prep a new cut rather than ruining that perfect plate. Really, dear? My mother said once Jessica left, you haven't answered. How are you affording this? Their stares lock onto me like floodlights. I knew this feeling years of being cornered, made to justify my choices, only to be met with condescension. But this time, I had nothing to prove. I had created something extraordinary, something entirely mine. I considered telling them everything then, letting the truth rip through the table like lightning. Before I could decide, Jessica returned with Bradley's revised plate, now dry and overcooked. Much better, he said, chewing the lifeless duck as if it were triumph. My father flagged Jose for the wine list. Let's try something more impressive, he said, choosing a Bordeaux I'd sourced personally from a vineyard in France. A bottle priced at nearly $1,000. That's an excellent vintage, I offered, though it won't pair well with the remaining dishes. I think I know my wine. Dearer, Jose glanced at me. I gave him a nod. Let them have the showpiece bottle. It wasn't worth the fight. Course after course followed, each dish, a small marvel, was greeted with lukewarm praise or outright criticism. The desserts rived my deconstructed lemon tart, a house signature, and still, the barbs continued by the time coffee was served. I felt like I'd been balancing on a wire the entire night. Then Marcus approached with the check, a black leather folder placed discreetly in the center of the table, closing in on the moment I'd been both preparing for and dreading. My father instinctively reached for the check, an old reflex tied to pride and responsibility. But Bradley was quicker. "Please, Richard, allow me," he said smoothly, slipping into the role of provider with the ease of someone who viewed generosity as performance. "Consider my contribution in honor of the occasion." My father made a perfunctory attempt to decline before nodding his approval. Bradley opened the folder with a self-assured smile that quickly wavered, his brow furrowed as he scanned the bill, confidence replaced by thinly veiled concern. "Something wrong?" my father asked, picking up on the sudden shift. No, Bradley replied hastily, regaining composure, just verifying the total. I knew exactly what had caught him off guard. A luxurious dinner for 7, complete, with rare wine selections, personalized off-menu items, and that $800 Bordeaux came to just over $3,000. Nothing extraordinary for a high-tier establishment like Maison, but still a sum that demanded attention. He reached for his wallet, drawing out a black credit card with a deliberate slowness clearly meant to impress. Heather, sensing an opportunity to reassert herself, picked up the earlier thread with a saccharine tone. "So, Dre," she said, feigning concern, "you never explained how you're contributing to this extravagant evening. We'd hate for you to overextend yourself just to keep up." Once again, eyes landed on me. The usual unspoken hierarchy began to reassert itself. Heather the pinnacle, me the perpetual enigma. "I can manage my share," I replied calmly. "Can you, though?" she pressed, leaning in. "I mean, we all know how limited restaurant wages can be. Are you truly able to afford a place like this?" The air grew dense. Even my parents shifted uncomfortably at the pointed jab. "Heather," my mother said quietly, attempting to rein her in. "No," she insisted, "I think we deserve honesty. We've all been acting like nothing's changed. Like it's totally fine." Darth threw away her future. "Maybe it's time we stopped pretending." A flush crawled up my neck, my chest tightening the way it used to during those endless dinners when I was always the one being cornered, criticized, measured, and found lacking. Sensing a chance to regain ground after his surprise at the bill, Bradley joined in. "If you're having trouble covering your portion, just say so. No shame in needing a little help." "I'm fine," I said evenly. "Then enlighten us," Heather continued. "Because this meal costs more than most people earn in a week. Are you racking up debt, using credit cards to pretend?" Before I could respond, Bradley frowned again. "Hold on, this bill is incorrect," he announced, pointing to the numbers. "It only lists the drinks. The food's missing." He signaled for Marcus. "Excuse me, there's a mistake," he said confidently as Marcus approached. "You've charged us only for the wine." Marcus arrived with the calm of someone who had been anticipating this exact scene. "Is there an issue, sir?" he asked smoothly. "Yes, the meal itself isn't on the check," Bradley pointed out. Marcus glanced at the paper, then turned to me with an unspoken question in his eyes. I nodded. "There's no mistake," Marcus said. Turning back to the table, "Dinner has already been taken care of." "By whom?" my father asked, his voice sharp. Marcus's expression shifted ever so slightly into something warmer. "By Miss Dara. Her table is ready whenever she's finished. Investors are expecting her shortly. Would you like me to address anything else in the meantime?" The silence was instant and absolute. All heads turned toward me, some in confusion. I took a breath that seemed to echo across the silence. "Welcome to Maison," I said. "My restaurant." The weight of those words hung between us. My father blinked. "You work here?" "No," I replied, voice steady. "I own Maison. I'm the executive chef and the sole proprietor." Heather's mouth dropped open. "That's impossible. This place is featured everywhere. It's been in Food and Wine, Bon Appetit, and was awarded 4 stars in the New York Times." I finished for her. Bradley looked like someone had pulled the ground out from beneath him. "But you said you worked in food. You weren't specific. I wanted to see how you'd treat me when you believed I hadn't succeeded," I said. "Now I know." My mother's fingers trembled against her pearls. her default tell in moments of social instability. Darling, why didn't you tell us? She asked, trying to inject warmth into her voice. This is quite the accomplishment. Of course, now that success had arrived, it rewrote the narrative. My passion was no longer irresponsible, it had become justifiable. Would you like to hear the full story? I asked. Then I began, not waiting for permission. I had no idea. There, Allison said, eyes wide with surprise. The concierge at Ethan's office recommended this place. He said it was the most talked about restaurant in the city right now. I promise, I didn't know it belonged to you. I believe you, I replied calmly. None of you could have known. I made sure of that. But why keep it from us? My mother asked, her voice brittle with confusion. We're your family. We would have been proud. I couldn't hold back the short, incredulous laugh that escaped my throat. Proud? From the same people who called my dream a phase, who said cooking was for the help, who cut me off when I decided to follow my own path. You mean that kind of pride? My father shifted uncomfortably. Darer, now that's not fair. We were concerned about your security, your future. If we'd known you were this successful, that's the point. I cut in. You couldn't see the worth in my passion unless it came packaged in recognition and prestige. It only matters to you now because it's profitable. Just then, Chef Miranda appeared, sharp and poised in her white coat. The words Miranda Torres, Chef de Cuisine, stitched proudly across the front. Sorry to interrupt, dear, she said gently. The Matsuhisa group is here for their tasting. Saul wants to confirm your interview for next week. And your publisher called again about the cookbook cover design. I nodded. Thank you, Miranda. Let them know I'll be there shortly. As she walked away, I turned back to my family. Their faces were etched with a mixture of shock and a cookbook. Heather asked faintly. Yes, I replied. It's being released this fall. 120 original recipes, each with a personal story. My mother sat up straighter, her voice softening into the tone she used for social damage control. Darling, this is extraordinary. Why didn't you share any of this before? We could have supported you. I tilted my head. By cutting me off completely when I needed you most, we thought it was a temporary rebellion. My father interjected. We didn't realize you had this kind of entrepreneurial ability. Clearly, you take after me. A flash of heat shot through me. No, I built this without your help, without your contacts or money. This success is mine alone. Bradley, who'd been uncharacteristically quiet since the big reveal, suddenly leaned forward with renewed interest. A cookbook deal that usually comes with a generous advance. And this place it must bring in serious revenue. Have you considered opening a second location? Maybe even forming a group? I know people in hospitality investment who'd love to meet you. I smiled, amused at his sudden pivot. I already have trusted partners, but I appreciate the suggestion. Heather gave him a sharp look before turning back to me. So all this time, while I thought you were barely getting by, you were building all this behind the scenes. I met her gaze. Yes, she scoffed, voice rising with disbelief. And you just sat there tonight, letting us pick apart every course, every wine pairing, every portion size without saying a word. I needed to know, I said. Study to see how you all treat me when you thought I had nothing. That's manipulative, she hissed, though her tone cracked with embarrassment. Not more than implying I must be broke or dating someone wealthy just to afford dinner here. I replied evenly. You weren't worried, Heather, you were entertained by the idea that I had failed. The room had mostly emptied as service wound down. Jose approached, cradling a bottle of vintage cognac. Mr. Your special reserve, he said respectfully, for your investor meeting. Chef Miranda says the kitchen is ready whenever you are. Thanks, Jose, I said. Tell her I'll be there in 10. Then I stood, turning back to the table. I have a business to run. Thank you all for coming. Dara, wait. My mother said quickly, her tone pleading now. Don't leave things like this. We should celebrate. Come to brunch this weekend. Let's reconnect. For the first time, I looked at her not as the woman whose approval I used to chase, but simply as a person trying to catch up to a reality she'd ignored for too long. I'll think about it, I said gently, but tonight, I have responsibilities. I turned toward the private dining room, but behind me, I heard the unmistakable sound of hurried footsteps. I turned to find my mother trailing me, her mask of calm slipping. "Dare, please," she said in a lowered voice. "You just dropped this revelation on us. We need to talk." I glanced toward the room where my actual priorities waited. "I have a meeting, Mother." "Postpone it," she insisted. "This is your family. My business isn't something I cancel at whim," I replied. "Especially not to entertain newfound interest in my life now that you see me as successful." The rest of them had followed her. They stood awkwardly near the bar, not sure whether to retreat or push forward. My father looked uncharacteristically unsettled, unused to feeling out of control. Heather's face twitched between indignation and reluctant awe. "Let's continue this tomorrow," my father offered, slipping into a negotiation tone. "Dinner at our place. We'd love to hear more talk about next steps, Bradley." "Maybe you're firm. I don't need help," I said, holding up a hand. This wasn't about proving anything. I didn't build Mason to gain your approval. I built it because it's my purpose. Because I love it, not because I needed to validate myself to anyone. And with that, I walked away, leaving behind the table that had once defined me, and stepping fully into the life I'd created on my own terms, no one suggesting otherwise. My mother backtracked, voice gentle, almost pleading. "We're genuinely thrilled by everything you've accomplished. Are you truly proud, Mother?" I asked, eyes steady. "Or just relieved that my career no longer puts you in uncomfortable social situations?" "You didn't know I was thriving," I said evenly, "but you were fully aware I was doing something I loved. That alone should have warranted basic respect." A silence, heavy and unspoken, settled among us. "You're right," my father finally said, his voice low. "We should have supported your ambitions, regardless of the outcome." Coming from him, the acknowledgement felt monumental. Richard Mitchell wasn't known for revising his opinions. "So, where do we go from here?" my mother asked, a note of vulnerability I rarely heard coloring her words. I took a breath, thinking carefully. Despite the friction, these people were still my kin. The wounds were real, but so was our shared past. I hadn't wanted to sever ties completely, just enough space to build something without judgment hovering over every decision. "I don't know yet," I admitted. "But if we're to have a relationship going forward, it has to look different. I'm not some black sheep needing redemption. I'm a chef, a founder, a professional who deserves respect." "Of course," my father replied quickly, nodding. "That means no more digs about my career, no unsolicited suggestions, and absolutely zero attempts to use my restaurant as a networking hub," I added, casting a deliberate glance at Bradley, who looked appropriately chastised. Heather's gaze softened. "About the wedding," she began cautiously. "What about it?" I asked. "I still want you there," she said, her voice sincere, not out of obligation, but because you're my sister. I studied her, searching past the competitive edge that had colored our relationship for so long. There were still traces of childhood loyalty buried beneath the layers of rivalry, shared secrets, hushed laughs, bonds formed in girlhood. "I'll be there," I said. After a pause, I added, "And if you'd like, I could host a dinner here for the bridal party on the house." Heather's eyes widened. "You'd really do that after tonight? You're still my sibling," I said simply. "But just to be clear, this isn't about winning anyone's favor. It's something I'm offering because I'm proud of what I've created." She nodded slowly. "I'd be honored." It was the first real smile we'd exchanged all evening, small but genuine. "I really do have to head out," I said, gesturing toward the private dining suite. "Of course," my father said, attempting understanding. "Business comes first." "Not always," I corrected gently. "But tonight, yes." As they gathered their belongings, I added, I'm available for brunch on Sunday, but not at the club. There's a cafe in the East Village I think you should try. We'll be there, my mother promised. Looking strangely relieved, I watched them exit the restaurant, each of them quietly digesting everything they'd learned. Their perspectives had shifted, maybe not completely, but enough as the door shut behind them. I released a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Miranda returned, everything all right? Getting there, I replied, families, she said with a wry chuckle. My mom still tells people I work at a diner. I laughed softly, grateful for the camaraderie. Let's go review the spring menu. I've got some fresh ideas I'm excited about. As we moved toward the kitchen, my refuge, my pride, my purpose, I realized the most meaningful moment of the night hadn't been revealing my ownership. It had been recognizing, deep in my bones, that I didn't need anyone's validation anymore. I had built this life, step by step, on my own terms, and that truth was worth more than applause. Each Saturday, Messon's kitchen became more than just a culinary space. It transformed into a sanctuary of learning for eager apprentices. They reminded me of myself a decade ago, fueled by ambition, craving knowledge, needing only a single person to believe in their worth. Among them, Zoe stood out. Her dedication was unwavering, her creativity infectious. I had recently invited her to begin an apprenticeship under my direct mentorship. Watching her evolve brought a kind of fulfillment no professional recognition ever had. Chef Jessica's voice broke through my thoughts, warm and familiar. We've finished everything for the night. Do you need anything before we head out? I shook my head and smiled. You all did a stellar job today. Thank you. They offered cheerful goodbyes as they filled it out, leaving the restaurant quiet once more. I remained seated at my table, notebook open to an untouched page. For days, I had struggled to draft the introduction to my cookbook. I wanted it to carry meaning, not just recount my professional path, but encapsulate everything I had overcome. In the stillness, the words began to take shape. Food has always been my truest expression. When conversation failed, flavor spoke for me. When the road ahead vanished, my senses led the way. These dishes hold more than ingredients. They contain the story of someone who chose authenticity over convention. Years ago, I stood between security and passion. Choosing passion brought hardship, but it also led to a life rich with meaning, defined not by titles or applause, but by the integrity of following a voice only I could hear. I set the pen down, exhaling slowly. The words felt right. Tomorrow loomed with obligations, vendor negotiations, final touches on the cookbook layout, Heather's spiraling wedding dilemmas. But in that quiet pocket of time, I was deeply content. The path I'd carved had been steep and riddled with missteps. There had been countless nights where fatigue blurred my vision, and I'd caught sleep against walk-in fridge doors or prep counters, burns, scars, cuts. Each one etched a story of persistence. Crises of doubt had knocked at my resolve more times than I could count, but I hadn't veered. I hadn't persisted to prove anything to others. I simply couldn't live a life that silenced who I was meant to be. By choosing honesty over conformity, I discovered something far more profound than recognition or praise. I discovered who I truly am. Have you ever stood at a crossroads, torn between fulfilling someone else's vision and honoring your own truth? I'd genuinely love to hear your experiences in the comments below. If this story spoke to you, please give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe for more powerful narratives about strength, growth, and unexpected transformation. And share this video with someone who might need a reminder. The most meaningful validation doesn't come from the outside, it begins within. Thank you for walking beside me on this journey. And always remember, the truest measure of achievement isn't set by others, it's found in the passion, peace, and purpose you create for yourself.